Hi, I'm Victor, and I'm going to be speaking about my new book, The Great Big Crystal Ball in the Sky, Part 1. Today we're going to go over the main points from the first chapter. This chapter begins by admitting that today astrology is kind of a joke, for the most part, but that it wasn't always that way, or it isn't entirely that way. The core of astrology is actually the original science of humanity. The core of astrology is telling time. It's the science of telling time. That's what astrology is entirely built on. It's entirely built upon time and the interpretation of moments in time. The connection between astrology and time telling might not be obvious. So imagine if you had no watches, no calendars, nothing. And you were all by yourself in the wilderness. How would you tell the time? Well, obviously you look for the sunrise and you look for the sunset. And that's how you tell the time in a basic manner. So, well, what does that tell you? That tells you that the sky tells you the time. That tells you that the sun tells you the time. The movement of the sun is the basis on which time can be measured. And so when it rises, we call it a new day, and when it sets, it's another night. And in this way, you can start to say, well, it's about halfway through the sky, so it's midday. Or it's about, so you can start to make hours, not just days. And that's not just cool stuff. That's survival. This is why it's humanity's first science, because it's required for your survival. It might not be too obvious with a day, but you'll see how it comes out with a year. In a day, but even in a day, you see, you need to know when it's going to get dark, because by the time it gets dark, you need to be safe. But more important than knowing when it's going to get dark is knowing when it's going to get cold. That's really important, because you need to know when to plant seeds, you need to know when to harvest them, you need to know when to store, you need to know when to feast. Otherwise, you die. So we need to figure out how to keep track of a year, not just a day. And well, there's 3 different ways that you can keep track of a year. One by the moonlight, one by the starlight, and one by the sunlight. So let's talk about each one real quick, though. In the book, I'll go into it in more detail. The moonlight, it's if you try to tell the time at night, you're in a bit of a lurch because there's no sun around. But you can look for the moon. And the position of the moon can tell you the time at night. But if you start to look for that, you'll notice that the moon has a cycle. It has this 30-day cycle. It's not the same every night. The moon doesn't come out at the same time and set at the same time every night. It does so in a 30-day cycle. And you'll notice that there's about 12 of those cycles in between one cold season and the next. So the first way that you can measure a year is by moonlight, that it takes 12 moon cycles. And then you get another year. But the problem with that is that it's about a couple of days off. So after a few years, you start predicting the winter at the wrong time. So there's a better way to do it. That's by starlight. But you got to be an early bird. You have to wake up before the dawn. And the reason why you have to be an early bird and wake up before the dawn is because it's the only time that you can see, more or less, the stars and the sun at the same time. It's right before the dawn. So that's when you need to make your measurements. And if you wake up every day right before the dawn and you look to the east where the sun is going to rise, and you just make a quick sketch of what stars are there, you'll notice after a few days that it's not the same every day. It's gradually changing. And if you sketch every day, finally after 364 and something days, you'll get a sketch that looked exactly like the one you did on the first day. So that's another way of measuring a year. That's a year. The sun will have moved relative to the stars, one complete circle through all the stars. That's why your sketch will look the same after 364 days, basically. So that's the second way. The first way is by moonlight. It's not so accurate. The second way is by starlight. It's not so easy. But the best way, because it's not inaccurate like the moonlight, and it's not really difficult like the starlight. The best way is to measure by the sunlight. It's also the most direct. All you got to do is put a stick in the ground. And it's got to be straight. Put it at a straight angle. You put a stick in the ground and you measure the shadow that it casts every day at the same time. Let's say at noon. So every day at noon you measure the length of the shadow cast by the stick, and you'll notice that it changes every day in a cycle, getting bigger, getting smaller. And the length of that cycle is exactly 1 year. So these are the things that astrology figured out in the beginning. You may say, well, this is not science. It's certainly not rocket science. It's certainly not quantum physics. But, it is the mother of rocket science. It's the mother of quantum physics. Because this is the beginning of empirical clarity, observational thoroughness, record-taking, measurement, mathematics. This is the beginning. This is where it all begins. Why am I so sure that it's the beginning? Because it's the survival. It's necessary for survival, and survival is the first need. So here's where astrology began. This is still today the core of astrology, and this is why astrology is fundamentally a science of due respect. And based on this ability to know what time it is, a whole lot of things are going to become possible. And in the next chapters, we'll talk about how this original form of the science becomes the thing that we have today. But that's all for now. More is coming next week.